For this is what the Lord says, He who created the heavens, He is God. He who fashioned and made the earth, He founded it. He did not create it to be empty, but formed it to be inhabited. He says, I am the Lord, and there is no other.
Now the sixth day began with the creation of the animals. We saw that already. And at this point, the whole focus of the story changes. Up to this time, God had been preparing the earth to be inhabited.
Then God said, Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground.
So God created man in His own image. In the image of God He created him. Male and female He created them.
Perhaps as you were listening to that verse, you were wondering just who God was talking to when He said, Let us make man in our image. Just who was God speaking to? Well, we'll cover that later on in the story, but for now, all you need to know is that the Bible says that God created man in the image of God. Now, obviously, this doesn't mean we're exact duplicates. None of us are all-knowing, all-powerful, or everywhere present at one time. Nor does the Bible teach that we are little gods. Rather, man is like a mirror that reflects the image of the object, but is not the object itself. In a sense, when you look at man, you see many things that man holds in common with God. First of all, God created man with a mind. Okay, that's the first thing. In a sense, God gave us a dab of His intellect. Because we have a mind, we are able to investigate, understand, and create, which are abilities that God has. But although we have an intellect, we are not all-knowing. Indeed, we're born into the world with very little knowledge. All our knowing must be learned. God also created man with emotions. The ability to feel is a very important aspect of being human. Without feelings, your response to others would be like that of a robot, cold and calculated. In contrast to an emotionless robot, the Scripture tells us that God is compassionate. He is tender. He feels anger when He sees injustice. God created us with feelings because He has feelings. Well, God also created man with a will. So we've seen that we were created with a mind, with emotions, and now with a will. The ability to choose separates us from the world of robots, which cannot make independent decisions. They only feed back what is programmed in. So God created man in His image. But there is more.
The Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being.
Okay, the words breath of life are often associated with the spirit or the non-material side of man. This is an additional reflection of God's image, for God too is a spirit. As we stated before, spirits cannot be seen since they have no bodies. However, in man's case, God chose to provide a physical house of flesh and bones for man's spirit to dwell in, a house formed from the dust of the ground. Once formed, the body was laid there, complete in every way, but entirely lifeless. But it was when God breathed the Spirit into man that the body became alive. Only God can impart life. No person or angels has that ability. Once again, we see that God is completely distinct from all His created beings. He is greater than them all. Now, the first and the only man that God created was named Adam. In Hebrew, this is the word for man. God then created the woman.
The Lord God said, It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him.
So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. And while he was sleeping, He took one of the man's ribs and closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib He had taken out of the man, and He brought her to the man. The man said, This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. For this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh.
The man and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame.
These verses have generated heated arguments. Some have understood that when God made woman, He made her a second-class citizen. This is not so. The Bible says that God took woman out of man's side to be a companion, not from man's heel to be a slave. Later, Adam gave his wife the name Eve, which means life-giver. God took Adam and Eve and placed them in a special garden which He had created for them. The garden was called Eden. We have very little idea what Eden was like, but it certainly would have been an ideal situation. Obviously, God did not create a garden where Adam and Eve were just getting by. The garden had an abundance, and everything Adam and Eve could possibly need was more than adequately provided by God. God didn't ask Adam and Eve if they'd like to live in Eden. God knew what was best for them. He could act without consulting anyone simply because He was creator, therefore He was owner. Why? Remember the paddle illustration? He who made the paddle also owns the paddle. Right. Okay.
The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it, the world and all who live in it.
Just as the angels belong to God because He created them, so man belonged to God because God created man. And just as the angels were given the position of being God's servants, so God gave man the responsibility of taking care of the earth.
The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it.
Just because God did not consult with Adam and Eve about placing them in the garden did not mean that they were without choice. God had created man with a will, the ability to choose. However, when it comes to some areas of life, such as love, having the capacity to choose is meaningless unless there's an alternative. So God placed before man a choice, a simple option. It involved two trees.
In the middle of the garden were the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
God gave specific instructions. The first tree mentioned is the tree of life. If man ate from the tree, then he would live forever. No problem. The second tree, however, came with a warning. It was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's important to understand that it wasn't just the tree of good and evil. It was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Adam and Eve knew about good, but evil was another matter. They had both been created perfect and were innocent of all wrong. Their experience was limited to God's goodness. The Bible says that if Adam and Eve ate the fruit of this one tree, then not only would they know what was good, but they'd also know what was evil.
And the Lord God commanded the man, "You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat of it, you will surely die."
Okay, we saw earlier on that to defy one of God's physical laws, such as gravity, has repercussions. And that principle, a broken law, has consequences. That applies to any of God's laws or commands. And in this case, God gave man one simple rule. Don't eat from that one tree. Don't eat the fruit from that one tree. And the consequence of breaking that command was made just as plain. Man would die. We'll discuss death in greater detail later on here. This single tree was what distinguished man as a human and not as a robot. There's a big difference between a person who's programmed to say, "I will obey you," and someone who does this of their own free will. Having the ability to choose is what gives the word obey meaning and depth. Choice makes a relationship genuine. Now, in giving Adam and Eve a choice, God was not intending them to run off and establish their own agenda. Rather, man was created to reflect God's grandeur, to honor Him.
You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being.
When a son is obedient to his dad, he honors his dad. So it was between man and God. Man was created with a will so that by the obedient choices he made, he would honor God. Indeed, as the creator of the universe, God deserves all the honor that man would give him. The result of showing such honor would be that man would enjoy tremendous benefits. It's always been true that when man fits into God's plan for him, man finds the greatest happiness, the greatest fulfillment, the greatest reality. So it was with Adam and Eve.
God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over every living creature that moves on the ground."
The Bible speaks of God coming in the cool of the evening to walk with man. And Adam and Eve were able to do this because they were innocent of any sort of evil or wrong. They had a perfection that allowed them to be in God's company. You know something? Only perfect people can live in the presence of a perfect God. Let me say that again because that's very important. Only perfect people can live in the presence of a perfect God. The Creator was Adam and Eve's best friend. This was the relationship Adam and Eve had with God. God lovingly provided for them, and they lovingly obeyed God, honoring Him. It's the way God created things to be.
God saw all that He had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day.
God always finishes what He sets out to do. We may change our mind about our plans, but God never does.
The plans of the Lord stand firm forever, the purposes of His heart through all generations.
Creation was done. The Bible tells us that God rested on the seventh day, not because He was tired, but because His creation was complete. It was time to lean back and enjoy.
When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, the son of man that you care for him? You made him a little lower than the heavenly beings, and crowned him with glory and honor. You made him ruler over the works of your hands. You put everything under his feet, all flocks and herds and the beasts of the field, the birds of the air and the fish of the sea, all that swim the paths of the seas. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth.
Paul, I'm sure that whenever you've taught this section on creation, you've had someone who wants to know what the Bible has to say about evolution.
Yes, I have, Therese. Now, the Bible doesn't mention evolution, so it makes that easy. But it is a subject in which people are seeking answers, and I think it is good to get answers. Now, fortunately, there has been an explosion of written material on the subject of creation versus evolution, and much of it is readable for the layperson.
Well, and I know that the controversy between evolution and creation has been presented as a debate between religion and science. Would you comment on that?
Well, first of all, it's not entirely safe to designate evolution as science and creation as religion. You see, since Charles Darwin first published the theory in 1859, classic Darwinism has been largely replaced by neo-Darwinism and punctuated equilibrium. And these theories differ greatly from each other. No agreed-upon scientific body of facts exists that explains origins. Now, on the other hand, to put creation wholly in the religion category is not correct either. You see, a significant community of scientists has concluded that this complex universe could only exist if there was a designer, such as God, or a team of designers.
Well, obviously this is something to study out.
And there are many good resources written by scientists, experts in their fields, that address these issues.
Paul, one of the most common objections I've heard to the creation account is that the Earth's age appears very old, but the Bible does not allow for vast spans of time. Would you comment on that?
Yes. Now, it is true that scientists have developed numerous astronomical, solar, biological, terrestrial clock models to measure the age of the universe. But while these models employ reasoned calculations, the computed ages have left scientists scratching their heads. You see, depending on the clock used, ages range from just a few thousand years to billions of years. And so the question is this, and what you have to ask yourself is, whose clock is right?
Well, is there a reasonable answer that fits the biblical account?
Well, going strictly by the Bible, we know that God created a mature earth. And on the day of his creation, Adam could have walked among towering trees and marveled at immense animals and gazed at the stars in the night sky. And perhaps he thought, wow, this place has been around a long, long time. But you know, God would have told him that at most it was just 6 days old. He had created the whole universe in a fully functioning state. Now, scientists, in looking back, try to determine the past by what they observed, just like Adam. The Bible, however, records the origins of the earth from the perspective of an eyewitness, and that's God himself.
So what we have is either an eyewitness report or someone's best guess after the fact.
That's right.
Wow, obviously something to study out.
Oh, for sure. And for those who are interested, we can send them a list of resources that they can investigate. And much of those are accessible on the internet.
That's right.